a large extent, or certainly quite a big extent, is the product of the fact that he has failed to bring on board the Sunni community in a way that makes it feel included in the political process. And that has provided very fertile soil for the extremists to move in and exploit. His armed forces are clearly in a lamentable state. They're poorly officered, and the rank and file seem to be demoralized. That's why they broke and fled. And the police forces are even more likely to actually sympathize with the insurgents than with the government on a local basis. So all this, there's a big political legacy and a big legacy in the Iraqi armed forces of inadequacy and poor officership above all, because the core of the army used to be the Sunni officer corps. All these things are not easy to fix, and that's why it's going to be very hard for Mr. Maliki or anybody who wants to help him to turn this situation around.
That's Jim Muir, our correspondent in Beirut, covering the situation in Iraq. With me in the studio is Prashant Rao, who's the bureau chief for Agence France Presse in Iraq. He's actually broken his holiday in London to be with us to talk about this. That, I suppose, in itself gives us a sense of the importance of this development. But let's just also look to what the US has been saying, Prashant. They've been calling this a growing menace, and they've been warning of a regional threat because of ISIS moves in Mosul. That's a serious warning from the US, so this is this is significant.
That's right. I mean, ISIS is widely seen as an incredibly potent force in the region now, on par, if not higher, in terms of its capabilities and operational capacity than Al-Qaeda's front groups in Iraq. It controls, as you said earlier, an enormous amount of territory in Syria and increasingly in Iraq. And one of the sort of problems that's going to come from this is, in fact, that they've seized a lot of military vehicles from the Iraqi army, and that's going to increase their military capacity as time goes on.
What's strange almost is that, we've heard about ISIS fighting in Syria, very potent force there, and then all of a sudden they kind of sweep in. I mean, they took Fallujah and Ramadi in Iraq earlier this year. Now they've taken the really big city, Mosul, and all of a sudden they have carved out this territory that they were seeking. How could that possibly have happened?
Well, for months, sort of senior American officials and senior Western officials have been warning that this is, not a force to be sort of taken lightly, that they have tremendous paramilitary capacity. They're not just, your sort of run-of-the-mill militant group. And they've been issuing these warnings for a long time. And ISIS...
So has the Iraqi government just been ignoring those warnings?
Well, the Iraqi government has also been making those warnings, but there's a difference in terms of the capacity of the Iraqi government and the Iraqi army to handle those warnings and to address them, as we can see by the fact that Fallujah has been out of government control since the beginning of the year. So as a result, I think it comes down to the fact that, by want of its name, the Islamic State, it wants to control territory, and that's its goal. Unlike other militant groups that have perhaps different aims, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant wants more and more territory in these two countries.
So you now have this Sunni militant force versus a Shia government in Iraq. Is the country verging on collapse here?
I mean, it's very sort of early to go that far. Certainly this is really troubling that a sovereign state can lose this much territory this quickly. But, the Iraqi army is a big army. Of course, these past few days have raised fresh questions about their capabilities. But the security forces are 1 million strong. They have Hellfire missiles, M1 tanks, they're getting F-16s. So they do have sort of growing military capacity, and the Kurdish region to the north has some as well. So, it's not... it's maybe too early to talk about that. We should be talking perhaps a little bit more about the response that could come if it does.
And briefly, we just were hearing from the Nineveh governor, the governor of the province of Nineveh, who was complaining that the Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki had pretty much ignored warnings about the inability of security forces to defend Mosul.
That's a persistent sort of theme from Sunni leaders, and so the governor of Nineveh is a Sunni leader. His brother is a sort of virulent opponent of the Prime Minister, the Speaker of Parliament. This has been a persistent theme from them, that military leaders and others have been giving warnings that the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant is making advances and wants this territory, and the Prime Minister has ignored it. How much that's true is, a matter for debate, because also there is the question of capacity of the Iraqi security forces to address these warnings and respond to them.
And an issue of sectarian politics?
I mean, that's always potentially an issue, whether or not it is sectarian politics or simply just politics. In terms of the Prime Minister wanting to retain his post, there was an election 6 weeks ago in which he's trying to keep on for a third term, and how to separate sectarian politics from just regular politics is a little bit difficult to do.
Okay, yeah, it is a very complex situation. Prashant Rao from AFP, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.